Hello, welcome to the channel. Subscribe, leave a like, and don't forget to write a comment. Enjoy watching.
I always knew the holidays at my parents' house weren't going to be a warm, cozy Norman Rockwell painting. No one ever threw punches, sure, but the emotional damage always came wrapped in a smile and delivered over dinner. Like a casserole of passive aggression baked at 400 degrees of denial. This year, I walked in telling myself it wouldn't get to me. I'd play nice, drink the wine, and let them keep pretending that Jess was the sun we all orbited, while I hovered somewhere out of frame like a dim, distant moon. The smell of cinnamon and turkey hit me before I even opened the door, and for a second, I let myself pretend it was going to be okay. It wasn't. Jess answered the door, of course. Smiling that perfectly rehearsed smile, her teeth gleaming like they'd just stepped out of a whitening commercial. She was wearing a cashmere sweater, cream-colored, probably cost more than my rent, and her hair had those big soft curls that only come from stylists, never a drugstore curling iron. Erin, she beamed like we were best friends, not reluctant siblings bound by a bloodline and a very different shared history. We were just looking at pictures from the Amalfi Coast. Come in, you'll die. I didn't, but I wished I had. Inside, Mom already had wine poured, and Dad was doing his usual performance of silence and occasional nodding while Jess scrolled through her phone, narrating every photo like she was hosting a travel documentary. That's when Luca proposed, she said, pointing to some over-filtered sunset shot of a man kneeling in designer loafers on a cliffside. Luca was nice enough, charming in that slippery, too-good-to-be-true way. I never trusted men who wore turtlenecks without irony. You're so lucky, Mom said to Jess, not looking at me once. I sat down with my glass and smiled when appropriate. They asked how work was, but not really. Just enough to check the box that said we acknowledged Erin's existence. I said, same old, numbers and spreadsheets, and Mom chuckled like I'd just said I was raising goats in the woods. Always so practical, she said. Not like our dreamer. She nodded toward Jess, who was now talking about wedding venues and destination plans and something about lemon groves. I was tempted to ask if lemons in Italy were somehow morally superior, but I bit my tongue. Hard. Dinner passed in a blur of clinking silverware and compliments aimed entirely at Jess. Dad asked her about work, a PR job she got through a friend of Mom's, and she talked like she ran a Fortune 500. Mom chimed in about her old ballet recitals and how she always had that special spark. She lit up the room, Mom said. Even as a baby, we knew. And then she looked right at me and said, you were always so observant. Which is family speak for, you existed but didn't sparkle. The gift exchange came after dessert, and that's when the real performance began. Jess gave Mom a silk scarf from Milan, and Mom teared up. You have such taste, she whispered, as if Jess had invented the concept of fabric. Dad got a limited edition watch from Jess, and he gave her a wine subscription. Oh my God, this is perfect, she squealed. I gave Dad a framed photo of him and Grandpa fishing, taken the summer before Grandpa passed, and he nodded, almost smiled. Mom said, that's sweet, dear, like I was in kindergarten and had handed her macaroni glued to paper. Then came the moment. Mom pulled out a small white box, opened it slowly like she was presenting a holy relic, and inside was a diamond bracelet, delicate, sparkling, expensive. She turned to Jess, who was already wide-eyed, and said, you're our pride. The room fell quiet, except for Jess gasping and hugging her like she'd just won an Oscar. I sat perfectly still, staring at the wine stain on the tablecloth, pretending it wasn't happening again. But it was. And it always did. I felt the heat rise in my neck. I could hear my pulse in my ears, but I smiled anyway, that same tight-lipped, well-behaved smile I'd been perfecting since childhood. And then I stood up slowly, walked to the console table by the window, and picked up the plain brown box I'd left there earlier. I left my gift on the table, I said, loud enough for the room to hush. They all turned toward me. Jess still clutched the bracelet. Mom blinked like she didn't understand what I meant. Dad just kept sipping his scotch. I walked back over, set the box in the middle of the table, and sat down. Inside that box was no shiny object, no silk, no sparkle. Just a letter. Just my truth. And once they opened it, there wouldn't be enough wine or sparkle or fake smiles in the world to put this night back together. But I didn't care anymore. Because some gifts aren't meant to be pretty. Some are meant to make people finally see. And after tonight, they'd never be able to unsee me again. For a moment, no one moved. The box just sat there on the table, small and unremarkable, a plain rectangle of cardboard with no bow, no glitter, no gold foil sticker that said, "To Mom" or "To Jess." It was just there, quietly waiting to be noticed, to be touched, to be opened, like me, I guess, for the past 30-something years. Jess was still holding her diamond bracelet like it had been handed down from royalty, and Mom sat, stiffly with her wine glass raised halfway to her lips, caught in that half-second of uncertainty where the script hadn't told her what to do next. I didn't say anything else. I didn't need to. The box would speak for me. Mom finally reached for it, almost hesitantly, like she expected something to jump out, or maybe like she already sensed there was something about to change, something permanent. She peeled back the flaps, slowly, with those perfectly manicured fingers that always made me feel like I'd never quite measured up, even in the womb. Inside was a single sheet of paper, neatly folded in thirds, cream-colored stationery with a soft texture and a little ink smudge at the corner. I'd written it by hand, intentionally, because typed words can feel distant, but handwriting is personal. It's raw. It's your heartbeat on paper. She pulled the letter out, and Jess leaned in immediately, curiosity already shifting into suspicion. I watched them with a calmness I hadn't felt in years, maybe ever. There was a strange silence in the room, like the air itself had frozen to listen, and for once, no one was talking over me. Mom cleared her throat and began reading out loud, because of course she did. That way she could control the reaction, soften the blow maybe, or at least perform her part for the family courtroom. "Dear Mom, Dad, and Jess," she began, her voice steady, professional, like she was presenting an award at a charity gala. "I just wanted to take a moment to say thank you. Thank you for all the lessons you've given me over the years, not the ones you think you taught me, but the real ones. Like how to make myself small to keep the peace. How to watch someone else be celebrated for my effort. How to disappear without anyone noticing." Dad's brows twitched slightly, and Jess was already shifting in her seat, the bracelet now dangling loosely in her fingers, less precious, more foreign. Mom blinked twice, but kept going, her voice faltering slightly as the words got heavier. "You taught me what not to become, what not to need, what not to expect, and most of all, what not to believe about love. I spent years thinking there was something wrong with me because I didn't light up the room. Because I was quiet. Because I preferred books to boys and honesty over flattery. But I get it now. You weren't looking for a daughter. You were looking for a mirror. And Jess gave you that. She smiled when you wanted, danced when you watched, and repeated everything you already believed about yourselves." Jess let out a sharp breath, somewhere between a scoff and a sigh, but she didn't speak. "Not yet. I watched you give her everything: time, money, attention, patience. You gave her ballet classes and Italy trips and birthday parties with themes and centerpieces. You gave me that second-hand Honda when Dad got a new car, and you called it a gift like I should have fallen to my knees in gratitude. You gave her diamonds tonight. I got dry turkey and polite applause." Mom tried to interrupt then, but I raised a hand gently, and to my surprise, she stopped. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was fear of what came next. "Do you remember," the letter continued, "that time I got a C+ on a calculus quiz and you grounded me for a week? Said it was unacceptable? Jess failed accounting 3 times and still somehow got into grad school. That's, what, like a 50% average." Dad flinched, like a slap had landed somewhere beneath his collar, and Jess shook her head, eyes wide. She opened her mouth to argue, but the room was too still, too heavy now. I could see the sentence had landed wrong in their heads. The math didn't track. Not really, but no one said it out loud. Maybe they were too stunned, or maybe they were starting to notice the cracks they'd painted over for decades. Maybe someone would even go to the comments section of Life and correct me. Actually, 3 fails doesn't equal 50%. I'd laugh at that later. Mom's hands trembled slightly as she neared the end, because she knew what was coming next, even if she didn't know the exact words. Oh, one more thing, the letter read. The bracelet Jess is wearing right now, it wasn't from you. You didn't pick it out. You didn't pay for it. Grandma gave it to me before she passed. She said it belonged to someone who actually listened to her. Someone who was there. I gave it to Jess when she cried over her breakup 2 years ago. She didn't even ask where it came from. And you? You just assumed it was yours to give. Mom lowered the letter slowly. Her face was pale. Jess's bracelet hand was frozen in midair, like she didn't know whether to take it off or hide it under the tablecloth. No one said a word. Not right away. Not for a long, heavy, beautiful moment. And me? I just sat there. Not smiling. Not smug. Just seen. For the first time in years, maybe ever, I knew they couldn't look away. And I wasn't done yet. Not even close. It didn't take long for the silence to snap. Jess was always quick to strike when the spotlight threatened to move away from her, especially if that spotlight started illuminating cracks in the perfect picture she'd curated since childhood. She stood up so fast her chair scraped across the hardwood, a shrill, ugly sound that made Dad flinch and Mom blink like someone had turned the lights on too suddenly. What the hell is this supposed to be? Jess snapped, waving the letter in her perfectly manicured hand, the bracelet now barely hanging on her wrist like it was starting to burn. Some sad little attention stunt? You wait until Christmas Eve, in front of Mom and Dad, just to pull this bitter garbage out of nowhere. Her voice cracked halfway through, and I saw it then, the panic underneath her rage, the fear that maybe, just maybe, she couldn't spin this into something graceful. Not this time. I didn't answer her right away. I just looked at her, steady and calm, the way someone looks at a fire they already know isn't worth putting out. I let the tension settle, let the air stretch tight around her words like cling film wrapping around a lie. Mom looked between us, but she didn't speak. She hadn't said a word since reading the letter, and for once in her carefully curated life, she had no script, no passive-aggressive joke to ease the tension. No, let's not do this right now to shut things down. Dad, to his credit or cowardice, take your pick, just muttered under his breath, something like, "Not the time, girls," which was his way of saying he wanted his whiskey and his holiday peace and none of the mess he'd helped create. But I wasn't interested in letting this go anymore. I wasn't going to sit down and smile politely while the golden child spun this into another story where I was bitter and broken and she was misunderstood. You don't get to call it garbage just because it's true, I said, and my voice didn't shake. You've lived your whole life wrapped in compliments and approval and gift wrap. And every time I pointed out the difference, every single time, I was told I was too sensitive, too serious, too quiet. And still, I stayed. Still, I showed up. Jess rolled her eyes like she always did when she was cornered, like I was the unreasonable one for not just going along with the script. "This is about a bracelet," she said, laughing once, sharp and humorless. "You're really unraveling over jewelry?" But I could see the beads of sweat starting to rise at her hairline, the way her shoulders tensed like she was bracing for more, because she knew me well enough to know this wasn't about jewelry. It never had been. "You know what this is about," I said, and my gaze shifted to Mom, who was still holding the letter in both hands like it might bite. "It's about being erased in plain sight. About Thanksgiving, sophomore year, when you all went to Jess's regional dance recital and left me alone in my dorm, the one I'd just moved into after a terrible breakup. You said we'd celebrate on Sunday, but you never called. Not even a text. I ate vending machine crackers and cried in a stairwell. And you told me later it slipped your mind." That one landed, and I saw it, the flicker of guilt across Mom's face, the kind that comes not from remembering the pain she caused, but from realizing she can't deny it anymore. Jess's mouth opened, then closed. She didn't remember. Of course she didn't. Because her memory only worked when it was about her. But that's not even the part that matters, I continued, slowly, deliberately. Because I was gonna let it all go. I was gonna chalk it up to a lifetime of expectations and double standards and just keep moving. Until I read Grandma's eulogy. The one you posted online and read aloud at her service. The one where you said she called you her heart. Jess straightened, lips parting. She did say that, she began, but I cut her off. No, I said, the word landing like a rock thrown through a stained glass window. She didn't. She never said that to you. And I know, because I found the will. The real one. The handwritten one. Not the version Mom drafted with the lawyer. The one Grandma tucked into her recipe binder, behind the bread pudding instructions. She left something for me. Something you tried to keep quiet. Mom finally looked up then, her eyes searching mine for confirmation, for explanation, for any loophole in what I'd just said. But there wasn't one. Jess blinked hard. I don't know what you're talking about. I tilted my head. Don't you? The room was breathless again, heavy with unspoken questions and an ache that was older than any of us wanted to admit. I reached into my bag, pulled out a folded piece of paper, the same age stationery as the letter they'd just read. I didn't hand it to them yet. I just held it. Let them look at it. Let them wonder. I wasn't gonna say anything, I said finally, my voice soft but certain, but then I saw what you wrote in her eulogy, and you lied, Jess. She never called you her heart. The silence that followed wasn't shocked this time. It was scared. And I hadn't even opened the letter yet. The first time I found the codicil, I didn't even know what the word meant. I had to Google it sitting cross-legged on my kitchen floor, still holding that old yellow sewing kit Grandma Helen used to keep under her ironing board. The one with the faded green fabric and the rusted scissors that didn't really cut anything anymore. I was looking for thread to fix a torn button on a coat I couldn't afford to replace, and there it was, folded carefully into a sandwich bag, tucked beneath a cushion of pink pincushions and half-spent spools, a brittle piece of paper, written in the slightly shaky, looping cursive I'd watched her use on birthday cards for decades. It was addressed simply, for Aaron. When the dust settles. It wasn't notarized, but it was signed. And when I read it, I swear, my hands didn't stop shaking for a full hour. I didn't tell anyone at first. I sat with it, reread it, memorized it, and even smelled it like a lunatic because it still carried the faint scent of cinnamon and garden soil and the fabric softener she always used on her tablecloths. I knew what it was immediately, a hidden truth, a last whisper from the one person in the family who had ever really seen me, even if she didn't say it out loud often enough. Grandma Helen had been many things, but careless wasn't one of them. If she'd hidden this, it was on purpose. If she'd left it for me, it was because she knew, maybe not everything, but enough. So when I stood there in the living room, holding the copy I'd made, not the original, because I didn't trust anyone in that house not to accidentally misplace it, and looked at the 3 people I used to call my family, I wasn't doing it to start a fight. I was doing it to tell the truth, finally and fully, because no one else ever had. This is a copy of a handwritten addendum to Grandma's will, I said, my voice steady even as my heart pounded hard against my ribs. She wrote it by hand, signed it, and hid it in her sewing kit, the one she told me to take after the funeral. I thought she meant it for sentimental reasons. Turns out, it was the most important thing she left behind. Jess had the nerve to laugh, a short, brittle sound that died halfway through. So you're saying she wrote a secret will, she said, eyes narrowing like I was trying to pull off some kind of stunt. And conveniently only you knew about it? She didn't want the lawyers involved, I said simply. She said she didn't trust anyone to understand her intentions but me. And after reading it, I get why. I opened the letter slowly, the copy creased from being folded too long, and read it aloud, every word deliberate, every sentence chosen to cut clean through the fog of years and holidays and faked phone calls. To my granddaughter Erin, if you're reading this, I've probably already left this world, and I hope it was peaceful. You always understood peace better than anyone else in this family. You were my rock when your mother was off chasing perfection. You were my comfort when Jess was performing for attention. You never needed applause, and I want you to know I saw that. I saw you. I saw how hard it was to be invisible and still keep showing up with love in your hands. That's why I left the savings account in your name. It's not much, but it's yours, and yours alone. Please don't tell them unless you absolutely must. I don't trust them to respect it. I'm sorry to put that on you. Dad sat up straighter in his chair, finally realizing this wasn't just some emotional tantrum. This was legal. This was real. Mom said nothing, but her hand clutched the wine glass harder, knuckles whitening around the stem. But that's not all, I said, letting the pause stretch. There's one more part. I flipped the page and continued, the weight of it nearly pressing down on my tongue as I read. One last thing, Erin. I think Jess found this before you did. I noticed the sewing kit was moved one day when she came by alone. She was looking for something. I can't prove it, but I know her face when she's guilty. If she read this and said nothing, then you need to know that too. Jess shot to her feet like a flame had hit her chair. That's a lie, she said, voice rising, sharp and shrill. She was old. She forgot things all the time. You think she knew I looked through her stuff? That's insane. You're not denying you went through her things, I replied, keeping my eyes locked on hers. You're just hoping we'll believe you didn't find anything. Dad looked between us now, something dawning behind his tired eyes. Did you take anything out of the kit, Jess? He asked, his voice low and strained. Just tell me. Did you? Jess hesitated, and it was all the answer we needed. Her eyes flicked toward Mom, who still hadn't said a word, and then back to me. She didn't mean for it to divide us, Jess mumbled finally, her voice smaller now, less polished, less perfect. She would have wanted us to stay together. No, I said softly, holding the paper like a verdict. She wanted the truth to be known. She wanted me to be known. And you buried that because it didn't fit your story. The silence that followed was not the kind that brings healing. It was the kind that splits open every lie and leaves it gasping for air. And I hadn't even told them the part about the photo. That would come next. Because Grandma didn't just leave me words. She left proof. There's a particular kind of silence that fills a room after truth has exploded through it, the kind that doesn't feel peaceful or healing, but more like the thick, choking dust that lingers in the air after a building collapses, not the absence of noise, but the weight of everything that used to stand. Jess didn't speak for a long time after the codicil, after the accusations, after the soft way I told her that I knew what she'd done and that Grandma had known too. She didn't cry at first. She just stood there, eyes darting like a caged animal, still hoping for an escape route, still calculating which face to wear. But even good actresses hit their limit, and when the tears came, they came hard. Her voice broke apart mid-sentence as she tried to spin some version of the truth that made her the victim, about how she hadn't meant to keep it, how she'd only opened the sewing kit out of curiosity, how she hadn't realized what the letter meant, how she thought Grandma had written it in some senile moment of confusion. But the thing about guilty people is that when the walls start crumbling, they never admit guilt. They admit just enough to make you doubt yourself. She said she found the bracelet first, not the letter, that she'd tried it on because she missed Grandma and wanted something that reminded her of her childhood. Then, she said, the envelope just appeared one day later and she panicked. She meant to tell someone. She really did. She just didn't want to upset anyone. The performance would have worked once. Hell, it probably would have worked every other Christmas, every other family dinner, every other godforsaken moment where we let her be the one who hurt people and then cried about how much it hurt her to do it. But not this time, because she wasn't crying for Grandma or for me. She was crying because she got caught. I didn't yell. I didn't throw anything. I didn't call her names or list the million small betrayals that had accumulated like mildew behind the facade of our picture-perfect family. I just looked at her, and then at Mom, who had finally started to cry, not the quiet, broken sobs of someone reflecting on their failures as a mother, but the angry, trembling tears of someone furious that I'd ruined her evening. She didn't say sorry. She said, "You didn't have to do this like that," and that was all I needed to hear to understand that she still didn't get it, that she never would. "You were always proud of her," I said, my voice quiet, measured, so soft you could almost miss the blade behind the words. "Now be proud of what that made her." Dad sat still for a long moment after I said it, his eyes down, his hands folded like he was praying to something he didn't even believe in anymore. When I turned to leave, nobody stopped me. Nobody called after me. I walked toward the door with the kind of calm that comes after a storm has already blown through and taken everything with it. My coat was on the hook by the front door. I put it on slowly. I didn't slam anything. I didn't rush. I just left. But just as I reached the porch, I heard the old creak of Dad's steps behind me. I turned, expecting nothing. Maybe one of his classic noncommittal grunts, maybe a last-ditch attempt to make this all disappear. But he held something in his hand. A plain white envelope, the kind that had seen time and dust, and a drawer that hadn't been opened in months. He looked at me like he hadn't earned the right to ask anything of me anymore, but still needed to offer something anyway. "She mailed this here about a year ago," he said, voice barely audible. "Said it was for you. We never opened it. Your mother didn't think it was important." I took the envelope and nodded. I didn't ask why he never brought it up. I didn't ask why they always decided what mattered and what didn't. I just walked to my car and slid into the driver's seat, heart thudding against my ribs like it still hadn't caught up with what had just happened. It wasn't until I was parked at the end of the driveway, engine idling, that I opened it. Inside was a photo, grainy and soft at the edges, of me and Grandma in her kitchen. I must have been 9 or 10, standing on a step stool with flour all over my sleeves while she held a cookie sheet with her usual proud smirk. We were laughing. Really laughing. It looked like a different life. On the back, in her handwriting, the same looping cursive as the will, were just 9 words. "Pride isn't who shines. It's who stays." I sat there for a minute with the photo in my lap, the engine humming, the bracelet now cold on my wrist like a chain or a crown or something in between. I looked up at the house one last time. Through the rearview mirror, I saw Mom standing in the doorway, frozen like she'd been caught in the middle of a freeze frame, her arms crossed, her mouth slightly open, no words left to throw. Jess was nowhere to be seen. Dad hadn't come back inside yet. And that's when it hit me, somewhere deep in my stomach where old pain hides and festers until someone finally drags it out into the light. Maybe some gifts aren't meant to bring people closer. Maybe some gifts just break things open, so you can finally see what's inside. Some gifts break the silence. Some just break the family. I guess mine did both.